For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Good morning, both. Yes, so Asia-Pacific markets slightly higher today, although equities in Japan, I remember we were talking yesterday about them adjusting their yield curve control tolerance. It's very, very complicated, but the bottom line is that what it's doing is it's making the yield on shorter term treasuries, government treasuries, slightly higher, which means that equities have been suffering very, very slightly. But again, it's only a technical move, and at the moment things looking relatively flat. China has reported its first COVID deaths in weeks. There may well be more. People are looking at that very, very carefully to find out whether or not this is going to affect the economy in China. I mean, this is a hard way of looking at things, but this is what the financial markets actually do. Let's stay in China, but shift our attention to Apple manufacture, which is producing now some MacBooks in Vietnam. They're gradually moving away their production from China. This is production through Foxconn. They're already taking Apple Watches, some MacBooks already, and HomePods to Vietnam, also in talks with India, and the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing plant is about to open in Arizona in the United States. So a general feeling that Apple is withdrawing its manufacturing away from China. Let's turn our attention to the United States, and it may be that the week ends with a bit of a rally. S&P 500 futures have risen very, very slightly. Nike shares up 12%, FedEx up 3%. One dealer talking this morning on the wires was saying there's a tremendous amount of resiliency, as he puts it, in the markets right now. The one big economic thing in the United States is the size of mortgage applications, the amount and size of mortgage applications. We'll get those, and that may well contribute towards an end of week rally, and maybe a year-end rally too, because remember that the United States goes back to work straight after Christmas. The FTX founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, is flying from the Bahamas to face U.S. custody today. He's facing criminal charges. There are 8 of them, which include wire fraud, security fraud, and money laundering. It's expected to be a protracted trial process. He may well be freed on bail when he comes back in order to face that. Elon Musk, we've been talking about him for the past couple of days. If you remember, he put it up on Twitter as to whether or not he ought to step down. The majority of people who replied said yes. He's actually hasn't found anybody yet. Himself, he's saying anybody's foolish enough to take the job, you must like pain a lot. You have to invest your life savings in Twitter, and it's been in the fast lane to bankruptcy since May. Do you still want the job? I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you really? He's making it very, very difficult for anybody to wish to stand in there. The EU, just turn now to the Qatar bribery scandal. The EU, the union head of the International Labour Group, Luca Vicentini, has admitted taking thousands of euros from an MEP, but what he's saying, absolutely no allegations of wrongdoing at all, but it's all within this Qatar bribery scandal, which is enveloping the EU and which they need to deal with. So he is one of the casualties of it, but he is maintaining absolute innocence so far. It's worth looking at some sectors, and I'm particularly interested in media groups, which have lost an enormous amount. It's about £500 billion in value due to rising costs, less consumer spending, and also a drop in advertising too. The hardest hit sector, and in what has been a bad year for equities, we're talking about Walt Disney, Paramount, and streaming has helped slightly, but there's a big churn in streaming as well. People are going from one provider to another very, very rapidly indeed. In the UK, the nurses, one of the striking public sectors in the UK, have had a big backing from the UK public. Most importantly, I think, they've had backing from people who say they're members of the Conservative Party. the highest sector to get backing from a party like the Conservative Party. And of course, the Conservatives are in ruling position in the administration at the moment. So this may well tip the Prime Minister in having to deal with it. And finally, I mention this chap quite regularly because I think he's very good about oil. Dan Yergin. He's now predicting. He's S&P Global Vice Chairman now, and he's predicting $121 a barrel for oil if China were to open. Of course, at the moment, it's not quite clear about that. And if a general recession, he sees crude at about $70 a barrel. So quite a wide gap between optimism and pessimism. But at the moment, you can take it from he's saying that if everything goes to plan, then oil will be at $121 a barrel in the first 3 months of 2023. That's the global view this morning.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for the update on the nursing strikes in the UK. Particularly worrying and just wondering at what point Rishi Sunak will come to the negotiation table and perhaps review the salaries and monies with the nurses. It would be interesting to also find out what the impact has been, since the strikes commenced. Also, I'd like you to just to talk about following up on Twitter's or Elon Musk's Twitter. There's a news yesterday about perhaps votes influencing the outcome of the final results of whether he's stepping down or not. The argument for this by one of the users analyzing that was that the number of people who voted didn't quite tally with the number of people who reacted to the post. Well, I voted. I don't think I clicked on like or retweet, so I might be one of those people whom would be under question. And then finally, just going on to Apple, moving away more and more from China. Which other nations or where would you think they'd be moving their business to in terms of production? In November, there were talks of going to India, widening their relationship, trade relationship with India. Would that be up for conversation, as well as which other nation perhaps, or which other country would they be seen to be working with?
Apple, first of all, going to Vietnam as well. India, yes. And also starting its own plant run by Foxconn and Taiwan Semiconductor in Arizona as well. So I think what you're seeing is it's not quite onshoring, but it's certainly moving away from China. China, I mean, never mind the security aspect of it and whether Tim Cook happens to be in league with Joe Biden and the Democrats about this, because, as you know, they're very keen about national security. But the fact is that it's very, very difficult at the moment for them to predict whether or not there might be more regulation. They don't know whether they're going to be workers there. So the outlook in China for people actually wanting to manufacture there is a little uncertain as well. So I think there are two things involved in here. Politics, certainly, and also business, not knowing about manufacture. As far as Musk is concerned, he's saying himself, isn't he, that it's not a job that he would recommend to anybody. And quite right too, because we don't know what shape Twitter is going to be in. He says that he might just stay on. I mean, this is a sort of ploy. Politicians do this all the time, don't they? Back me or sack me. And even though there is it's a marginal, but not a huge majority. As I understand it, 57% of those that replied said step down, which is not a massive majority, but it is a majority. And it may be that it says, okay, well, there's nobody coming forward, so I'll have to do the job myself. I really don't know. It's not a job that I would want. I don't think anybody would want to work for an autocratic leader that is not willing to say which way the company is going to go, because presumably he simply doesn't know. And given the fact that advertisers have walked away as well from the whole Twitter thing, it's going to be a very, very rocky road from now on. Be interesting to see what happens. My prediction is, for what it's worth, I think he'll probably come back, but let's see. And finally, the nurses. Yes, I think most significant about this is the enormous amount of public support that we're getting. I think they probably would get that anyway if you were asked in the street, do you support the nurses' action? Do you think they're paid too little money? Yes, of course, you would say yes, wouldn't you? But the fact is that all the concerns about inflation busting awards and the rest of it have moved away, particularly from members who say they're members of the Conservative Party. These are the people that I think Rishi Sunak will be worried about. And I suspect, I mean, there is still time before Christmas and then afterwards. But the nurses are saying they will start firm action in the new year in 2023. And if they do, I think the two sides will be brought closer to the negotiating table. The government has to be seen to be digging in at the moment.
Okay, talking about the strike in the UK, people are being advised not to use their car. Don't use your car. Don't run. Don't have fun. Don't engage in any kind of strenuous activity while the nurses are on strike. Ambulance unions are going on strike today as well. Steve Barclay met with the unions yesterday, the ambulance unions, but the whole thing degenerated into nothing. No agreement was reached. The question is, Steve Barclay, Rishi Sunak, and others, how will they live with themselves if people die? Because it's very clear now that people may die, or will die, of course, if they continue to mismanage the situation as they have. So how will they live with themselves? And then as for Elon Musk, yesterday I pointed out that Tesla shares had been downgraded on the Wall Street. And Elon Musk had a response. He said, whatever is happening to Tesla is as a result of macroeconomics. And I was talking about inflation and all of that. But his critics continue to insist that there is the absence of leadership at Tesla and that the chaos that is causing in Twitter is affecting Tesla. Only yesterday, 8% reduction in the shares of Tesla. Who is right, the critics or Elon Musk, or it doesn't matter?
I think it does. I think that, if you or I were looking at a company, one of the things you look at is the quality of the management. There's no question. I mean, it's very, 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 very good indicator of what's actually going to happen with the company, how long those people have actually been in the job, what their thoughts about the future of the company. None of this is being shown as far as Twitter is concerned, and I do feel as though it's very difficult to concentrate. I mean, maybe his brain is big enough to cope with it, but it's certainly what Tesla shareholders are not feeling at the moment. They don't feel as though the company's being led, and of course he can say what he likes about the macroeconomics of things, but the fact of the matter is that you have to be concerned with the nuts and bolts of a company like Tesla, because it is, after all, a manufacturing operation, and it's moving into new territory, clearly, but it is a manufacturing operation, and you need to be absolutely across not just how your cars are being manufactured, but also the large amount of returns that they're getting for various faults in some of the cars as well. So all that is big things. You find very, very few people. A lot of people take non-executive directorships, but very few people run separate companies. So he's got SpaceX, he's got Tesla, and he's got Twitter. SpaceX, as I was saying yesterday, many people are saying it's easier to land on Mars than it is to run Twitter. I mean, this is how bad it is. And he's not exactly, he may be so, well, I'm telling the truth, but he's not exactly after getting recruits to fill his shoes. And finally, on the strikes, well, I think I share your concern. I mean, all these warnings about, not to drink too much at Christmas and not to fall over, that seems completely fatuous to me. I think much more indicative of what's going on is that all the politicians all the conservative politicians are very careful not to blame the workers. What they're blaming is the unions. And actually that's quite an important difference in the way the blame game is being carried at the moment. So it's not the individual nurses who are getting blamed for this, but the unions themselves. I still feel as though it has to resolve itself, but it may be some time.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odire joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, we begin with the airline operators of Nigeria. They put out a press statement yesterday or the day before saying that they are facing fuel scarcity with respect to Jet AON. And as a result of that, flights will possibly be disrupted or outright cancelled. Let's take a look at the statement from the airline operators of Nigeria. They said they wish to inform the general public of impending disruptions in scheduled flight operations due to the scarcity of aviation fuel, otherwise known as Jet 1, which they say reared its ugly head again in the past few days. The scarcity will no doubt force airlines to reschedule flights, leading to late operations and or cancellations. They continue. saying that, I think, pleading with the public, saying that this unintended development is a pain on airline operators and a stain on the industry, especially at this time of mass movement of people for Christmas and New Year festivities. While we do our utmost best to manage the situation and ensure safe flight operations, we plead the understanding of the traveling public in the circumstances. And then finally, third part of the statement saying that we also call on the concerned authorities, including production importers and marketers, to do their best to resolve this ugly situation so as to ease the stress it brings on the traveling public. As airline operators, we remain committed to doing all that's necessary to ensure seamless services. It's just terrible timing. This is, again, a deregulated product. There's no subsidies on this, so the supply is supposed to be there. But we've talked ad nauseum all throughout the year about the price pressures that the airline operators are facing. They've had meetings with the NNPC, they've had meetings with the House of Representatives. They asked for a license so they could import the fuel themselves. How that makes a difference, I don't know, because it is still deregulated and the price is the price as dictated by rising oil prices. I don't know. This is now going for, during the festive period, there's demand for flights, as we know. So that means that if flights are cancelled or delayed, you've got less flights, and then demand is still high, which means prices will even skyrocket more than they usually would. Look, the only way for these players in the sector to augment this increased cost is to raise prices. I don't know what else that can be done at this point, because if you go outside the studio right now, the streets are blocked because people can't buy fuel for their cars, and now you can't buy fuel for airplanes. I don't know. Anyway, we move on to Ivory Coast. Speaking of fuel, no. Actually, Kenya. So yesterday we talked about William Ruto, who had a list of revenue options or revenue targets for Kenya. One of those revenue targets was to cut the budget by $3 billion for the 2023 through 2024 fiscal cycle for Kenya. And one of the ways he was supposed to do that, or he plans to do that, is to remove fuel subsidies. However, the Energy Regulatory Authority in Kenya said they're going to maintain fuel subsidies for December because of the festive period, and then they'll review in January. So there you go. And then, now the Ivory Coast. So the Ivory Coast, they are flagging off in Abidjan a couple infrastructure projects. And I think we can take a look at the list of the project. It's they're extending, so it's a metro line. They're going to be building a metro line, also extending the international airport. The metro line is supposed to cost about 1.3 billion euros. France has provided credit facilities and loans to be able to finance this. We'll hear from Bruno Le Maire, the French Minister of Economy, in just a second. It's supposed to carry about 500,000 passengers daily when it's ready, create about 2,000 jobs. The completion date they're looking at is 2025. So here is Bruno Le Maire, who was in Abidjan to flag off the commissioning of the projects.
The purpose of my visit is obviously to mark the concrete launch of the completion of major infrastructure projects here in Abidjan, the metro, which is of special importance to Prime Minister Patrick Ochi, and the airport expansion project. The metro is one of the largest infrastructure projects on the continent. It is an ambitious project, a social project that will benefit millions of people in Abidjan. Ivory Coast has achieved economic and stability successes that make it a model for many other countries. Growth, jobs that are created, infrastructure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, they will finish that rail. There will be no delays. That rail in Abidjan, in the Ivory Coast, will be completed. It will not be like the blue line and the red line in another famous African nation that has had for 40 years now not been able to complete that. They will complete that project. That's your African business updates for today, with no fuel.
All right, thanks, Rotus. We cannot but start from the no fuel angle, part of the story, starting off in Nigeria, and it's quite ironic. You put it side by side Kenya, who are looking to keep subsidy just so that their citizens can enjoy the festive season, can enjoy this period. Unfortunately, just before you came in, I was just thinking of the fact that despite promises made, unfortunately the queues still remain in terms of even onto aviation fuel. And just to throw that light so that we can see a reprieve. The promise was that in the week leading up to Christmas, we will see the queues thin out, which close towards the end of last week, we started seeing less queues. It seemed like, the situation was getting better. Unfortunately, it hasn't been sustained, and we still have, and the resultant effect on traffic, just to highlight the fact that it's a great time. It's supposed to be a great time for business owners because of the Christmas rush, where people go out to buy things for their, food items, clothes and things. But it is a deterrent for people to go out to the shops because you don't want to be stuck in traffic for 4 hours. So it's important to understand the bigger implications of fuel scarcity, of course, beyond the obvious, especially at a time like this where businesses are trying to recover from a not too great year economically. Now, moving on to aviation fuel, again, talking about movement and the timing. I mean, there's no time that, the scarcity of aviation fuel is appropriate. However, even more than before is that a number of people are planning to travel this season. We understand how security on roads are, so people have, thought to resort to air travel. Unfortunately, again, this is a barrier to and you can't but feel sorry for the airline operators because they had to surmount one issue after another and still maintain airfares and attract customers. We talk about an enabling environment for businesses to thrive. These are some of the issues that we need to be looking at.
Okay, aviation fuel. This will be the third time this year. In May, the airlines complained about scarcity of aviation fuel. They did so again in July. At the time, they even apologized and explained that some of the airlines may even have to shut down completely because they didn't have access to fuel. And the argument then was that the high cost of aviation fuel was an issue, the non-availability was an issue, with an average airline in Nigeria spending between 60 million and 120 million per day on aviation fuel alone. Another time, of course, we saw the effect in terms of disruptions and also in terms of the high cost of tickets. The cost is so high that even now, some people are boasting about traveling from Lagos to Warri by road and claiming to enjoy it. You will enjoy it if you probably don't have an option, but it's not as if the roads are also safe. Now, in December, the same airline operators are saying, look, there could be disruptions, there could be issues. So, stress for the aviation industry, pain for travelers, higher cost, and unfortunately, during Yuletide. So how do we address the problem? The airline operators themselves have suggested that, look, there is monopoly in terms of the importation. Now, is it possible to assist them with access to Forex so that if it is possible, they too can import the aviation fuel directly and not have to depend on marketers, product importers and marketers? Okay, maybe that will be a way forward because at the end of the day, it's the people that suffer. And of course, you know that these airlines, they also have employees. So additional pressure on that subsector. Now, as for Kenya, the simple message from there is that Kenya has been trying to remove subsidy and they just keep postponing it. What they've done now is to postpone the increase because of Christmas. That's the explanation that is given. So that shows empathy. It simply means, governments should look out for their people. If it were Nigeria, have we not been in this country at a time when it is 3 days to Christmas, that's when government will come with a policy that would throw everybody, on the wrong side of the aisle. Okay, so it's about empathy. Then they will eventually come around to it. Finally, Ivory Coast Metro. Now, I mean, I understand why you brought it up. You are citing red line, blue line. Yes. No, you even have to go all the way back to the past when Lagos State was to have a metro line. But that was disrupted. Today, Lagos is here to have that metro line. and Lagos needs that metro line. The current Lagos State administration is promising that progress is being made with the red line, with the blue line. We are anticipating that that will indeed happen, and that it will not be a repetition of what happened in the past when the metro line in Lagos was abandoned. Otherwise, we'll sit down here and we'll be praising the people of Ivory Coast, and we'll be lamenting that we don't have metro line. And given the population of Lagos, that infrastructure, is even more urgently needed here, because part of the responsibility of government is to invest in infrastructure to make things easy.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Roger.